are being propagated. The other important constituency is policymakers. I have, since the 1st of June, taken up a job that you probably, for some people, they have seen me in a jacket and tie for the first time in a long while, and they're wondering what's happening. I work with a group of people called policymakers on other issues of human rights, good governance, maladministration, the African ombudsman on the continent. And I find it difficult to note that only 3 on the most of the 37 member countries of the Ombudsman Association I work for have environment as part of the things they look at when they're looking at whether there is good governance happening in a country. One of the countries in our neighborhood is Namibia. South Africa, the public protector, which is what they call the ombudsman in this country, do not put environment. It's not part of her mandate. We do not have an environment ombudsman. This is how second place issues of environment are in as far as they relate to development. And in the short space of time, I have worked directly with people who are close to policy making and monitoring and evaluating and bringing the state to account through Parliament and the Chapter 9 institutions. I have found the importance of getting these messages that we have over many cups of coffees, many lunch tables, and many conference venues discussed, and we are in agreement with. Until those people are brought to the table to understand these things the way we do, it is going to take time. And I'm emphasizing this because they are in charge of the resources. They have a constituents through being voted into Parliament to be able to determine these policies. This is why they put themselves in the concrete block in ICC and put 3 fences around them and have half the security personnel in the city just protecting them. And yet the policy and the decisions they make in that corrugated, self-made prison is going to impact on everyone there and outside. But what happens is that the people who have access to them are the people with power, the people with money, the people with very little to lose other than their profit. But the other constituents that is not here and that is not able to be part of that conversation, they have everything to lose. So my work with Wally and Timbawat, actually I was introduced to Wally in 1999. I got here from Zimbabwe to study masters in economic history and development sociology. And as someone coming from the rural areas, having grown up in the farms in Zimbabwe, I was always interested in the issues of rural and community development and social policy around development. And when I was here traveling around KZN, I noted the increase in plantations. But these were not only happening in large-scale plantations, but in small woodlots in the former KwaZulu area. The people who are aware of the geography of this country would know that there was South Africa for the people and there were homelands for the masses. And KwaZulu was one of the homelands where the masses stayed, and the masses were not important as a people because they were not considered so. They were only important as a source of cheap labor, and deliberately the economy of the masses had been disoriented and disintegrated and removed from the market to ensure that they are only able to sustain themselves in as far as getting a little to eat today and the rest they had to beg from the people who lived in South Africa. Post-94, Most of the land in South Africa that was accessible on the market had been bought, large-scale corporate farms, large-scale plantations, and for minerals and so forth. So some companies started realizing that in the homelands, there is a lot of land that is under the Ingonyama Trust. That is the trust formed by the monarch of the Zulus. So they went into they realized that their expansion and the only basis for the sustenance and the expansion of their profit is to extend their growing of these trees onto that land. That is the background. So they started to go and propagate woodlots. They said, if you plant eucalyptus and wattle, we would buy these from you, you will make money. Because one of the biggest poverty in the rural area is monetary poverty. There is no money circulating in this area. They didn't tell people that we do not want money to circulate there anyway, and we've put in place a mechanism that makes sure that you go to work for it, we pay you very little, and with the little you have, you spend it in town and go back with little things called groceries. So the intention was never to have money circulating in the rural areas. The second thing they said is, oh my God, this space has been removed, has been deforested. There is no more trees in this space. This is why there is gully erosion. This is why the rivers are drying up. This is why all the cattle are dying, and you have so much problems. So we want to reforest. That's the word they used, reforestation. So they went in and promoted these woodlots to address the question of deforestation and desertification and gully erosion and improving the water availability in the rural space. So by 1990, some companies such as Mondi had started a project called Kulanati. SAPI had a project called Project Grow, which was about growing. So the language, I'm going back this far just to show that there is nothing new in the language that we hear the other people or the people coming back to the masses and say these mechanisms we're putting in place are there to help you. They have always historically used the language of the needs of the masses to capture their schemes as long as they want to get something from the masses. The hunger from their side was land. There was no more land, landlessness of a different kind. And the rural communities were seen as holding this land. So they went to the tribal authorities, they went to the Amakosi and negotiated that we need people on their individual land, we will supply seedlings. We will supply people who would instruct them as to how to grow these trees. We see it today in the project we've just finished with Wali and our partners GFC and Siemens, supported by Simenpu in Tanzania. We have realized that this is the same language that the companies such as Norwegian companies such as Green Resources, they go, even their name, Green Resources, the language they use, the wording of their companies. When Mondi and Sapi went, Kulanati is the Zulu word for grow with us. And Sapi said, we want to match these people who want to grow us. Our project is Project Grow. It's captured within this language of development, it's captured in the language of growth, it's captured in the language of empathy with the conditions of poverty that are attained, that are within those places. But what I then found through looking at the people who were putting these trees on acres of land from even less than 1 acre to 3 acres, some even up to 40 acres, was that after 10 years they were not making any money. The people who were making money were the truckers as well as the timber companies. And in a year where there was a drought and they could not come, and when they had produced more than they needed and there was a slump on the world market for timber products, they did not go and harvest. So people started to have problems. People started to realize that the land that was available for grazing, for their pasture, was no longer available. People started to realize that when they earned from this 3 acre of land, some people got as little as 1,200 rands of harvest. That is in US dollars, maybe about 200 US, after 10 years of planting 3 acres. 200 US dollars after 10 years. That is daylight robbery. But what we also got to understand by these eucalyptus and pine trees and wattle is that after that 10-year period on this piece of land, it's not like maize, which you can remove in this season and put beans in the other season and put carrots in the next season, and you can easily do that. The process of disturbing the roots and everything and preparing that land back to usable, arable land is very expensive and takes more than the time they have planted that first crop in the first instance. And we also know the history of where the masses stay, that they did not stay in the best of land. They were pushed into arid land. They were pushed into drier land, which meant that where, for instance, at Port Danford, just about 150 kilometers from where we are now, where eucalyptus can grow in 6 to 7 years because it has the best conditions in terms of the humidity, the water requirement, and so forth, this required double that period to get to an age that was mature enough to be harvested. So what this whole process was a daylight robbery and a theft, but people realized that they actually had secondary other problems. For instance, eucalyptus is a water guzzler. Its root goes very deep. It takes away water. Downstream flow of streams and rivers was reduced in a big way. The fires started to bring people's homes into risk of being damaged. So there were a lot of social, cultural problems that were associated with this so-called solution to rural poverty. So we then went to the Eastern Cape, where we did the same study around where Hans Merensky to compare the studies that were found in the north of Zululand, and we realized that the results were similar. Wale went to Swaziland to do the same study in the plantations in Swaziland, and the results were similar. Our partners in Mozambique looked at Mozambique, where there are plantations, the results were similar. So we realized that the whole plantation model is actually dangerous to the environment. It's environmentally unsustainable. It's actually a major risk to the environment. So within the context of climate change, where we are saying that the climate is under threat and there are problems to do with sustainability of the climate, to then introduce a risk project, a program, a plantation model, which is primarily a risk to the environment in the extent to which it undermines biodiversity. It's sheer madness. It really shows that the people who come up and make those kind of decisions have not, either, there are only two kind of explanations. They deliberately ignore the facts which are easily available to them for sheer expediency, for sheer need to simply get profits, or they have not been introduced to the facts. So this idea of the trees and plantations being the panacea for deforestation and therefore problems to carbon calculations done in the plantations, have actually realized that the whole process of the plantation, from its planting to its harvesting and the burning and the replanting, is actually emits more carbon within than what it absorbs within that life, its lifespan. So it is very easy to conclude, You do not need anyone who is persuasive. You don't need an orator to come before you to actually try and persuade you to realize that the plantation model is not suitable within the discourse of climate change, within trying to change the way in which the climate discourse is. What then could be one of the best solutions? For the communities we have talked to, replanting indigenous trees where they were. And there's also an assumption, we found this assumption very apparent in Tanzania, for instance, where in the southern parts of Tanzania, there is a Miombo grassland. There's a very type of particular, special, unique grassland that is there, found in those areas only, from within that whole area from Mozambique, stretching from southern Tanzania to Mozambique and Malawi. And when these Norwegians come with their companies and say, this is very bad, we have found land without trees, the question they do not ask is, for how long has this been a forested area in any case? What is wrong with having a grassland anyway? And their specific type of life that lives within that cannot live within a forest. So we are trying to say, the whole land should look like the Amazon, because what you see when you have planted a plantation of these timbers is not a forest, but it's a plantation. The whole idea of misnaming plantation as forest is like looking at a maize field or a sugarcane field and then call it a grassland. It's either you're very literate or you just decide to be stupid. A forest is a biodiverse area with different trees of different shapes, sizes, height, and so forth, and allows a diversity of life. Studies done in KZN and in many other areas actually show that where you have a plantation, they support less life than when you have a forest. So the whole idea is to look at trees and integrating tree planting, but not any type of tree, specific particular indigenous trees within rural communities in a manner that sustain their economies, in a manner that begins to let rural communities participate in the rebuilding of biodiversity within the areas they have. But what we have actually found with plantations is that people put all their land onto plantations, and plantations, for you to put a plantation of eucalyptus, you have to cut all the other trees. So as to avoid fires, you have to remove the grass. It doesn't allow you, it's not amenable to other biodiversities and other activities. In the north there, some people said you can put your cattle to graze in the plantation, so it doesn't undermine grazing lands. But what we actually noted is that over years, where you have put eucalyptus, the type of grass that remains growing there is no longer palatable for animals. The goats and the cattle cannot eat in those plantations. Then someone says, plantations, eucalyptus have flowers. Now we can make honey for everyone. Let us put bees into these plantations so we can make a beehive project, so as to maximize the income out of there. The results showed that bees are not interested in this monoflowering tree. It's just one flower, and it is bitter. You know that from gum trees, that's where you make your flu medication and so forth, because it's mint. It's bitter. Imagine your honey tasting like mint. So the honey that was coming from there was different from honey coming from the wild forest. So it was not a sustainable project. So again, what this means is to try and include this. This is what it means only to us, is that the whole language of plantations within the climate change discourse is a recolonization process. It's all about trees. It's all about accessing land. Then those, when they occupy and own the land, in many of the African countries where they have these land to do the timber plantations, they sign 35, Very few countries have signed 35-year leases. Most of them sign 99-year leases. That's a whole lifetime. So it means that for a whole 3 generations of people, the land that has been put to plantation and signed to these companies is no longer accessible to people. So we realize, okay, post-World War I, we cannot go and colonize these savages anymore. What we can do is to go and make deals with them and call these development partnerships. If you go and sit in the meetings when they negotiate these things, the people who ask questions that are difficult to these so-called investors are seen as non-developmental people and non-progressive. They are ostracized and sidelined from the communities. So they normally go to the traditional authorities, the councillors, at night and give them gifts to encourage them, to encourage their people to accept these deals, quote, accept taking away their land. So what we actually have noted is that there is a lot of corruption associated, introduced. We hear that these savages, these black people, these Africans, they are corrupt people. Whenever you give them resources for development, they take it and do other things. They don't develop their people. But most of the people coming Nicodemously at night with these packages to encourage our chiefs to be corrupt are those people who are not black and they are not women and they are not Africans. So who is corrupt? Who is introducing corruption? So this whole model of accessing means to mitigate climate on the plantation model is a big no. People have to be encouraged to do sustainable activities on the basis of what they are doing on a day-to-day basis where they are. So if these people had to go to the communities to ask the communities what is it that we can do so that we can begin to mitigate climate change, plantations will not be part of the things that they will ask for. Thank you.